April Fool's Day, 1967. Houston, Texas. The day of the legendary recording session for Red Crayola's Parable of Arable Land. Oh, you're not familiar with Red Crayola? It's okay. Kind of like the Post-it note. They've so ubiquitously influenced the fabric of our lives that you most likely know them only through their ripple effects on our culture. They're one of the seminal Texas garage rock bands, and considered one of the first real noise bands, first real punk bands, and first psychedelic band to ever use a chainsaw or a motorcycle in the studio. My dad was pretty low-key about his involvement with the Red Crayola and the Parable of Arable Land. In fact, I had no idea he was even on that record until I was sitting backstage one night with Pete from Sonic Boom, and he was showing me a copy of Arable Land that he had just reissued. I saw my dad's face in the group photo in the liner notes and was like, hey, that's my dad. When I asked my dad about this, he had totally forgotten all about the Red Crayola and had no idea anyone was, quote, still listening to that junk. So, this started me on my deep dive into the wild world of Texas psych music and prompted me to do this very casual and highly unprofessional interview with my dad about how he got to play the spoons on Parable of Arable Land and what it was like going to art school with the Red Crayola in Houston, Texas in 1967. So without further ado, let's jump in and let my dad do most of the talking. April Fool's Day, 1967. How did you get to be a part of that? How did that come about?
Well, I was telling your mom yesterday that Steve Cunningham, who was the bass player, was getting a degree in philosophy at the University of St. Thomas, which was a private Catholic college in Houston. Mayo Thompson was getting a degree in English and philosophy or something like that at the same place.
Okay.
And Rick Bartholomew, the drummer, had been kicked out of the architecture school at the University of Houston, and he started studying painting at the museum school where I was going to school. I wasn't aware of him at all at that point. And Rick, it turns out Rick's dad is a famous author, Bartholomew.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And
What
Rick
kind of stuff did he write?
I'm not sure, but Rick also became a writer after all this. So anyway, these three individuals were, and myself and many others, were clustered around this university, University of St. Thomas. University of St. Thomas was a private university run by Catholic monks. They were the priests, and they were teachers. We were all taught by Catholic monks, you know. But the funding of the school was by this woman, what's her name? Contemporary arts lady. Philippe. Oh, nuts, I can't think of her name. Shiladitya? What is the name of the woman who's the funder of St. Thomas? What was the woman or family? Menils, right, the Menils. Yeah, Dominique. Okay, so I guess she came from money, this woman, but she married a man who was a businessman who sold oil rig equipment in Texas.
Okay.
Texas was like an oil boom at
Yeah.
the time. So he was making cajillions of dollars. She, and him too, I guess, she was really into art, collecting modern art. She would go to Picasso's studio and buy stuff, and she would go, I mean, she knew, she was on that level. She knew all these artists that were coming up at that time, the modernist artists. And she was very excited about it, and she wanted the world to know about it, you know. Alexander Calder, Jackson Pollock, Klein, all that. And so because she was funding this college, she wanted to enlighten the students to modern art, modern music, modern dance, modern anything, you know. And so that was the beauty of us going to that school. I didn't know. I had no idea. It was just, for me, I was going to the Museum of Fine Arts, which was kind of non-accredited, it was sort of borderline.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to take credits, my credit courses. They didn't have credit card courses at the museum. So the closest university to me was not University of Houston, that was 4 piece away. But it was just a little school right down the block
Okay.
called St. Thomas. So I just, okay. It's a no-brainer.
So I see you were taking art classes
At the
museum
museum.
school, and then St.
Getting on my
Thomas was
little
the.
moped, or my little Honda, and going over to University of St. Thomas.
Uh-huh.
I was also working at Rice University, which was on the other side,
Oh, right.
practically within walking distance. Everything was in practically walking distance
Yeah.
from each other. It was all real in downtown Houston.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I'm walking into this situation where this woman was funding this university, bringing in Klaus Oldenburg, bringing in, what's his name, Andy Warhol, foreign films,
Oh,
foreign
wow.
film department, all this stuff, having, meetings with different intellectuals, and, things are going on. It's just like boom, 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 it's happening. And so we, the students, were the participants. We were getting all that. It was being given to us on a silver platter.
Because I feel like most people are surprised that this band came out of Houston, because they're like, well, Houston is just,
Yeah, a bunch of cowboys.
a bunch of cowboys in the middle of
Yeah,
nowhere.
little do they know. Yeah. Well, and Dominique de Menil's collection of art was so big, and she had such good taste, that every museum in the world, when she said, I want to create a museum, and the Louvre's calling her, the Met's calling her,
Huh.
everybody's calling her, saying, no, we'll build a building for your collection in New York, or, She said, no, I'm going to build it here in Houston, because
Right.
these are the people that made us rich. These are our peeps. These
Yeah.
are the people that helped us. We want to give back. So that's what she did. That's
And that
how
museum is beautiful.
It is beautiful. Yeah, everything about it.
When was that built?
Was
Around
that-
the same time, or
No.
later?
It was like in the 80s, I guess, maybe. Let's see, I'm trying to think. Yeah, it's in the 80s. When I came back to Texas, Mom and I came back, it was being built.
But she had already been kind of fostering these seeds for like a
Oh, yeah.
Bohemian scene, kind of, in
Yeah.
Houston.
Well, and she was bringing in different professors and different people, and she was buying up houses all around that area of the university where they could live. And there was this whole thing going on. She built that, what is it, that church with what's his name's paintings all in it.
Oh, the Mark Rothko.
Yeah, the Rothko Chapel.
Yeah.
That was a little bit earlier. Yeah, that was
Okay.
her first foyer and building, and then she built the Contemporary Arts Museum, or the whatever it is. So anyway, that was the area. There was cheap rent. I was renting a place for next to nothing. Students, could rent stuff around that area. It was a really cool, happening area. There's a folk place down the block. La Maison was right around the corner. In fact, she bought that.
What's La Maison?
La Maison was one of the, that and the Catacombs are the two underground rock and roll places in Houston. La Maison started out in a church. Then it moved to this old abandoned grocery store that she eventually bought. And it's part of the museum, the Contemporary Arts Museum, not Contemporary Arts Museum, her museum.
The Menil Museum.
The Menil Museum. It's an extension of that. I think Ty Wombly, whatever his name is.
Besides Wombly?
Yeah, I think he's got, his work is all in there. So anyway, it's all kind of there. So what I'm saying is that the students had chances to go to Europe, to go to, I took a trip that was funded by her for the arts, for any students that wanted to go, up to Dallas and Fort Worth, to the Dallas Museum, and then to these homes of these mega millionaires that had, you walk in and, oh, there's an original Pablo Picasso, and here's prints by blah blah, and it's just like, we're just free to kind of roam around, and the fellow who owned the place would tell us, oh yeah, I met Pablo in Spain a decade ago, and blah blah, stories about all that stuff. So this was this incubation place where the Red Crayola was, getting ideas from all over the world,
Yeah, it seems like you guys were being exposed to a lot of different influences and stuff.
It's like, whoa,
Yeah, which people
exposure
wouldn't
blush.
necessarily think in like the 60s Houston.
Yeah, right. I know. Yeah. Who?
134 Elevators was from Houston too, right? Then they moved to Austin? Am I remembering that right?
I'm not sure. I know that they had an apartment that I moved in next to it, or in the same building, in Houston.
Oh, wow.
Was that Houston? Pretty sure.
I thought that was in Austin,
Maybe it was in Austin.
by that park.
Eastwoods.
Yeah. Or was that a
I'm
different
not sure.
place?
I'm not clear.
I remember you talking about, living in some building that was like their practice space.
That may have been Houston, because where I lived was only like a block and a half or something from the Museum of Fine Arts. And what it was a stable that it was a two-story building that was the ground floor was a stable, and I think the other rooms up there were for servants' quarters for a bigger building that had been demolished and taken away. And there was a guy there, I've forgotten his name, who owned it, and he rented out rooms.
Huh.
And I had a room up on the second floor for a while, and then I moved down to what was a stable. It was like a garage.
That's so cowboy.
Yeah, I know. But anyway, and paid nothing a month, $50 a month or something,
Wow.
To live. And so that was the first place I lived when I moved out of the house. That's all I could afford.
And this was what you were living in when you were going to the University
Yeah,
of St.
yeah,
Thomas?
yeah.
So it was like you were kind of living in like the same building as the 13th floor elevators practice space.
Well, but I never saw, that was the history. I may have seen them once, but I didn't know who they were really.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious like what their influence was like, because I didn't realize Rocky Erickson actually played on a couple tracks on this record, this Red Crayola record.
Right. Yeah, they were tight.
Yeah, like he did some like the weird, like harmonica work on Transparent Radiation and
Oh yeah.
something else on Pink Stainless Tail.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which I wasn't aware. So yeah, so I mean, how close were the Red Crayola, or how aware were you guys of like 13 floor elevators?
Oh, I was aware of them
Yeah, yeah.
because they played at the at La Maison. They played at different places, and they were always. I mean, as soon as I heard them, they were like my favorite band.
Yeah. When did you hear them first?
I don't. You know, it was in Houston. It was probably at La Maison. Yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they were just so different, so, you know, right on the edge of crazy, that, you know, they're very attractive.
What were you listening to leading up to that point?
Well, you know, what everybody else was, you know. You know, the Byrds, the Beatles, the Stones, you know, all that. And Dylan, a lot of Dylan. I really like the folk scene. And there's the Mothers of Invention. I remember hearing them, and I actually saw them play up in New York. So they had a big influence. As far as kind of experimental stuff, I don't know, because see what they were doing, they were taking it even further.
Red Crayola.
Yeah. They were really into experimental. You know, it's just they started out with some kind of, you know, trying to play other people's music, and they finally just, you know,
Yeah.
just started doing whatever they did.
Yeah, Mayo seemed like he was really influenced by like John Cage and like
Yeah.
futurists,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
like noise dudes. How much were you listening to that kind of stuff,
Well,
or aware of
okay,
it?
okay. I was a midterm graduate of high school. I went immediately from Christmas, whatever year that was, 64 or something like that, to the museum school. I was still living at home. In the museum school, I met Richard Stout. Richard Stout got me a scholarship to go to Maine that summer to Skowhegan. I went to Skowhegan. Once I got back from Skowhegan, all I wanted to do was get out of the house and get out of Houston, you know. But I still had to go to school for another year before that happened.
So this was like 66, 67?
Yeah, maybe, something like that. So, this place, this St. Thomas, they had like a commons, a student commons, where you go in the morning, you know, and light a cigarette and have a cup of coffee and talk to your friends and then go to class. It had like a Calder mobile hanging from the ceiling. You know, it was like that kind of a place. It had,
Nice.
you know, artwork everywhere. And it was a liberal arts college, so it attracted people that were into literature and philosophy and music history and whatever, you know, writing, poetry, blah, 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 the arts. And so those were the people that were there getting barraged with all this information that this woman was giving us.
Domino.
Dominique Demenil. And so, you know, I met people there that were, you know, kind of on the Bohemian path, you might say. You know, they're already, you know, were into some kind of psychedelics of some sort, and, you know, very literary, which I was not, and into, you know, pushing the envelope, experimentation, you know, doing different things. There was a group that was another guy I knew. He founded an underground newspaper there at the college that changed names every time it came out, which was like once every couple of months. And it was like questioning Catholicism, questioning authority.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And this was at a Catholic college.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
His teachers, you know. And, you know, I mean, it was stuff like that was going on. You know? And so anyway, that was the crucible that we were in. And so these fellas, they formed a band, and, you know, as it says in here, they never played any place twice because they were so beyond the beyond that nobody could understand it. But he said, Mayo said that we were best accepted by art galleries.
Right.
You know, art galleries, museums, things like that, where people were into something that was different, new, and willing to, you know, give it a shot. And, but he said, you know, the other places were just like, ah. And, you know.
So how did you meet these guys though? Like, was it in that sort of
Yeah, it was
commons
in
that you were
school,
talking
yeah.
about, or
Yeah.
like everyone's out smoking
Yeah.
under the Calder?
Right.
Or were they already playing out at this point? Like, had you seen the
I think
band
they
play?
were. I mean, I was reading this a little bit and remembering that they had done some. I mean, they were a band before I ever got to know them. I mean, I knew them, and I was aware that they were in a band, but I was not like a groupie. I wasn't going to their shows.
When did you first meet them?
Just there at the university.
Like, was there a member that you felt closer with, or who did you meet first?
I think I felt closer to Steve and Mayo. I knew Mayo's girlfriend a bit, and Steve was just a nice guy and very shy, I remember. And Mamie, I think, she really liked Steve. And so I knew them. Rick was a little harder he was a little edgy, a little harder to get to know. And he seemed older too. But he seemed like he was on his path. And then there was Mayo, who was just kind of open and friendly and jolly. And Steve was a little shy, but just an interesting fellow. You could tell a lot was going on with Steve. But, you know, as I said, I didn't know them well. We weren't real close or anything. But somehow or other, word got around that this thing was going to happen.
What thing?
This
recording?
Yeah, this recording. And, you know, we just all jumped on board, you know.
Was it like an invite only kind of thing? Like, did Steve
think
or
it
Mayo
was-
come up to you and be like, hey, we're doing this thing? Or was it kind of like they posted flyers around the
No,
school and it
no,
was like
no.
a free form, like anyone can come?
No, it was anybody was invited, but unless you were kind of in that
Circle.
right? Like, for instance, I knew this guy pretty well. He and his wife.
Who is he? Just
his-
because this is an audio recording, so no
Yeah,
one knows who
right.
you're pointing to.
Yeah, right. Let me get his name right.
Oh,
48.
Mike?
Mike Medico. Michael Medico and Barbara Medico. She's somewhere in here too. They were a couple, and they were very nice. Just very interesting people. There's Steve, the bass player, right there.
Okay.
And this woman, what's her name?
Pat
Pat
Pritchett.
Pritchett. Well, her and her husband, Joe, they used to model for us at the museum school.
Okay.
So I knew them. I used to go over to their house and just hang out with them because they're so interesting. And, you know, so there's people in here that we knew. Jamie Jones, who's mentioned somewhere. And there was another fellow that I sort of knew.
Who's this
This
guy with
guy.
the Harley?
He's, who is he, 20?
Leland Rogers?
Yeah. Well, he's the guy.
Oh, is he the guy that signed them?
Yeah. Yeah.
He was like a like Kenny Rogers' brother or
Yeah,
something,
right.
which I had no idea.
Yeah, I
That's
know.
so crazy.
Yeah.
So he was like
small
kind of
world.
like a lawyer guy, but here he is on a
Right.
motorcycle.
I know, yeah.
Like, I mean, it seems like he's pretty participatory,
yeah, right.
pretty hands-on, you know.
Yeah,
I mean,
pretty
he's
hands-on.
front and center over there.
Well, and when you read this, you realize that he and his other kind of group of lawyers who knew nothing about music, but they were just ready. They formed this recording studio, and they're just looking for the next big thing.
Right.
And so they found the 13th floor elevators.
Yeah, that's pretty huge.
That's pretty huge. So they're looking for the next big thing.
Yeah.
But they're just doing it totally on a monetary thing. They had no
Right.
musical background at all.
Yeah, I heard he like saw Red Crayola play at like a mall, like a
It was
battle
the
of the
one and
bands.
only mall at that time,
Oh, yeah.
Gulfgate Mall in Houston, Texas, over on the east side.
Wow.
Still there today, I think.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. And they were playing a battle of the bands.
Yeah.
That's so funny. I wonder what other bands were there.
I don't know.
Well, you were aware of Thursday's Children.
Yeah.
Like, what were your thoughts about Thursday's
I don't know.
Children?
I mean, I don't know. Unless I heard their music, I couldn't say
You
anything.
told me they were a bunch of Rice nerds.
Well, they may have been. Because see, that was the thing. Rice, there's all kinds of interesting people at Rice. And then the museum school, there's all kinds of interesting people there, usually older. And then St. Thomas, there's all kinds of interesting people there.
So they kind of had their own little cliques.
Their own little cliques, but
sub-communities.
but then there'd be things going on at Rice, like Ken Kesey. He came to Rice.
Oh, yeah?
And did a whole thing at Rice.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
we all got to go and ride around on his bus all over town. And then there'd be other things, film things at St. Thomas. And then the museum would have things going on. They had big, huge art openings with gigantic paintings and stuff. So anyway, it was a whole cluster of culture,
Yeah.
there in Houston, Texas, of all places.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Kind of a renaissance at that time.
So, when, like, just getting back to this recording session, so you were kind of just in the mix.
Yeah.
You knew a bunch of these people. They were all probably like, hey, we're going to go do this thing. Do you want to come? I mean, do you remember, like, how you got invited or how you, yeah.
Just, I don't know. Somehow or other,
It was a happening.
It was a happening, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely happening.
You just heard that there was, like, a recording session going on.
Yeah,
I mean,
we
but
need to be a part.
how did you, were you playing spoons actively before that? Like, why spoons? How'd that happen?
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to think too. I don't know why. I guess it was because I had a background with rhythm because I played drums in junior high school.
Okay.
And
Did you play in any bands or anything?
no, I could never play in a band because my grades weren't good enough for my parents to buy me a drum set, and I didn't have money enough. I mean, later on in high school, I had my own job working at Shakey's Pizza. Could have saved my money and bought a drum set, but I didn't.
Yeah. You got some spoons instead.
Yeah, right. It's much cheaper. but I did see the Red Crayola.
Yeah, I mean, it worked out for you.
Yeah, no doubt. So anyway,
So you don't remember how the spoons
I don't know
became
how
your instrument of choice?
I don't know. I can't remember. I don't know why or how. It was just one of those things that seemed appropriate at the time. There was a lot of folk singing and folk places going on. Maybe I saw somebody playing the spoons. I don't think so. I don't remember. Because, I mean, when I watched Spoon Lady, she's so far advanced than anybody at that time. I mean, maybe there's some old hillbilly in Tennessee that could do the stuff she was doing, but
Yeah, were you listening to country music where you were hearing spoon?
not so much
spoons
country
being played?
music. It would be more folky.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, maybe I heard some folk music that inspired me. I don't know.
Did you know it was going to be like a recording session?
Yeah.
Okay, so you knew that going into it at
Oh,
least. Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't like you were like, oh, this is a recording session, but I guess I'll just grab some spoons.
Well, but I also knew that we were there just to make noise,
Yeah.
basically.
That's what they told you.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
You know, they just needed some backup noise.
Yeah, but I mean that would seem pretty, like, far-fetched at the time. Like, oh, we're going to go into a recording studio just to make some noise. I mean,
well, and see, I was never a big fan of what's his name, John Cage, but when I was at Skowhegan, Merce Cunningham, and I think John Cage came too. They would every week there'd be a different art star from New York that would come up, and they would crit everybody's work on Saturdays, and Saturday night there'd be a party, but I guess Friday night they'd give a lecture. And that was just a thing. It was a weekend thing, and they'd stay till Sunday, and then they'd go back to New York or whatever. But we had incredible people coming up. Merce Cunningham was one of them. I think John Cage came up too.
wow.
I can't remember, but Merce gave a lecture about dance and modern dance, and gave a whole history and blah blah blah. So I was aware of that and aware that was, it was experimental, it was new, it was very spontaneous and da 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 da. So there was that information. There was Mothers of Invention, who at the time, I mean, when I sat down and listened to their music, I thought, whoa, this guy is commanding an orchestra of people to do all this stuff, and it sounds very spontaneous, but it's all written out.
I know, it's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I was hearing them, I was thinking, wow, that's really spontaneous. And stuff was happening, It's like the Who were doing that rock opera, and the Beatles, of course, had just come out with Sgt. Pepper's. And I mean, there's a lot of experimental
67 was
stuff,
a big
bringing
year.
in other sounds from other countries and other, ways of looking at stuff. And and the art scene was the same way. People were playing around with all kinds of stuff at that point. And so, anyways, it was really kind of a melting pot. And so, to go into a studio and see a Harley Davidson motorcycle and a bunch of people with funky stuff. I mean, I don't know how many of these people had instruments. It doesn't look like
I wonder.
they all just look like they're standing around. But I had my instrument. And,
yeah, you came prepared.
I was prepared, man. I was ready for it. And so anyway.
I mean, I think you're the only one on here that says played the spoons. Everyone else just has their names listed. Like, no one is saying what they played on here. But do you remember anything about, like, what these other people were playing? Like, what other instruments were happening?
People were like, one guy was playing toothpicks,
What do you mean toothpicks? My dad's doing this thing with his fingers right now where he's clicking them together silently. Is that supposed to be like air toothpicks?
So there was people doing different things. I mean, I don't know.
Hope that guy was close to a microphone. I mean, how many microphones were set up in this room? Do you remember? Like, was it kind of like Phil Spector style, where there was just like one or two mics, and then just like all these people in the room?
Probably.
How like involved was the core members of Red Crayola in orchestrating this? Like, were they kind of telling some people to go over here? Were they kind of like, okay, now you guys play?
No, I don't think it was orchestrated.
Yeah, or like how much was like an engineer involved with like, okay,
I think it was
these
mostly
people...
an engineer.
All right.
I'm just trying to get a clear sound out of the whole.
And how many people are we talking here?
50 people.
Wow.
Well, how many does it say? Okay, 49 people.
You were number 49.
Somebody's got to be 49.
Yeah, okay, so how aware were you of like their actual songs? Like, were they playing songs at the same time, or was this all happening?
This was all happening, and then it was dubbed in, and they did
stitch it together
play with it
afterwards. Okay, so you guys were literally just doing
there
freak
to make
out
noise.
soundscapes to no music at all.
I think so.
Were you aware of what kind of music they were making at this point? Like, had you seen them play? You kind of knew what their sound was?
Yeah, I kind of knew. Yeah, they were. was Mayo. I'm sure all three of them were well aware of bands like the Velvet Underground and groups that were edgy. They were going towards the punk thing. That they're sharp. They're aware, and so I was aware of different bands like that. So their music kind of fit into that genre loosely.
Yeah.
From what I'd heard of them, and so this was just an extension of that. I mean, there was people doing happenings, and there was people doing, like what, 67, I think, was the big thing out in San Francisco, the Summer of Love. There's all this stuff going on around us, when was Woodstock? That was later, though. That was 69. But this was sort of a beginning of that kind of thing. I mean, just look at the men's hairstyles. Nobody even had long hair at that point. They're trying to grow their hair out.
Right.
But I mean, everything was new.
Pre-long hair, yeah, it's true.
At that time, I mean, everybody was pretty straight looking when you consider
yeah, it's true.
what was going to happen in the next 2 years.
Huh.
So
Yeah, like right at the forefront.
yeah.
So in this space, I mean, do you remember how long the recording session lasted? Like, was it at some odd hour of the night? Like,
No, it was evening. I remember there were, I guess, for some reason, I'm thinking there was a garage door. I don't know why, but it seemed like there was some kind of an open door at one end of the studio. And it seemed like it was evening, and it went on for, probably an hour, hour and a half, maybe
Okay.
2 hours, something like that.
not too long.
At the most, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we all just did our thing, and it was great fun, and we all went our separate ways. And, yeah. Happy to be involved.
Were the Red Crayola members like part of this freak out, or were they just sort of there and like guiding
I think
it?
they were sort of there. I mean, Steve was there.
Yeah.
That's him there. Maybe Mayo's in there.
Yeah, he's in
someplace.
this. They're all in this.
Are they?
Yeah. Then Rick's right there.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean,
Who took this picture? Do you remember?
I have no idea.
Or like when that was taken? Was that like before y'all started or after?
Probably after, but I'm not sure.
Why do you have this like? What is this, like a table leg?
Yeah.
What were you doing with that?
I have no idea. I came prepared, though.
Yeah, obviously.
I was ready for anything.
Good. Were people like taking drugs?
Probably were. That was in that little bubble of time was the first time I ever got stoned.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
At this session.
No,
No, just kidding.
I don't think I was. I can't remember. But no, I was hanging with some people at the university. Actually, what happened for me anyway was there was this guy George. George was like the Bohemianist of all of us. He was kind of a short guy, kind of heavy set, had hair longer than anybody else, wore those little bitty glasses, and smoked a little pipe, and just an interesting character. And so I would get with George every morning, and we'd drink coffee together and just kind of, And so he and this other woman I remember, she was interesting too, kind of heavy set, real short hair. And they said, hey, over at so-and-so's house tonight, they're going to smoke some weed. I want to come over. So Mamie and I went over, and we all sat in a circle. It must have been like a dozen of us, and we just passed a joint around, And it turned out that the couple were both people that modeled at the Museum of Fine Arts. So I knew them, tangentially, just because I was in like drawing classes and stuff. And they were like right down the block. Everybody was like walking distance practically, And so we went there and just got, ripped. And then, that happened. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if half those people aren't stoned, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't have the connections then to buy my own. It was just if somebody had some and I knew they were going to smoke, then I'd kind of be there. But, that's, and as far as anything heavier, I have no idea.
Yeah, I was surprised. There was like a kind of interview with Mayo where he was talking about Rocky and how, at that point already, Rocky was getting into taking acid daily.
Yeah.
And Mayo was like, wow, that's really intense.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think I'm a pretty far out person, but that's a little too far out for me, So yeah, I was curious if, how prevalent acid was around
I don't,
Houston,
I don't
or do you think
remember.
some of these people had access to it, like when they wrote this record? Like, I don't even know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
There was a guy, he was, I don't know what he was. He was he was an artist. He was there. He and his wife were both there at the museum school. She modeled a lot, and they both took courses there at the museum school with me, and he would talk about acid a lot and how he was going to turn the teachers at the museum school on acid and this and the other. I mean, he was like,
Yeah.
he was like, this is going to change the world. We're going to put acid in the water.
Oh my God.
I mean, it's like one of those guys. And, but I didn't know anybody that, he was the only guy that even talked about it
Wow.
much. It wasn't until I got to Austin where I, dropped acid the first time.
That's interesting to me too, because I feel like everyone just thinks of the '60s as this total drug haze, like the entire '60s. But
Yeah.
it seems
No,
like
really wasn't.
'67 was like a weird year because it was like kind of like right when it was like a cusp of that stuff getting more available.
Well, it depended on where you were. If you were in
That's
San
true.
Francisco, it was
Maybe
everywhere.
it was already, yeah.
If you were anywhere else, it was a little harder to get a hold of. Maybe New York,
Yeah.
but it wasn't so prevalent. Nor would I think it was that prevalent in Houston. It may have been amongst some people that I didn't know, but I didn't know them. So.
Did it seem like this whole art scene that you're talking about, was it pretty insulated from the rest of Houston? I mean, what did the rest of Houston
God,
think?
yeah.
Like who would be coming to these Red Crayola shows and stuff? Was there
Teeny
like a
boppers,
coterie?
just
of-
anybody,
Yeah.
People came, people were interested, the La Maison and the catacombs, there was lots of people there. People came every weekend, paid money to go rock out, see these groups,
So when you say these groups, like who else are you referring to? Do you remember any other Houston bands?
Moving Sidewalks and what was it? Yesterday? No, Thursday.
Thursday's Children?
Different
Bubble
other bands.
Puppy? See that?
Bubble Puppies.
Were you aware of like,
Mouse.
did any Corpus Christi bands come up?
Well,
like
they may have, but I just,
Bad Seeds, Liberty Bell, Zachary Fax?
they all may have. I just don't remember.
Okay.
They didn't make the impression that the Elevators did on me.
What was it about the Elevators? Like, what was your experience of their first show?
Because they were nuts. I mean, they had this guy up there with a jug of.
How much was that jug player? Do you think that had any influence on you playing spoons?
Maybe.
That seems like in that same realm.
Yeah. Well, it's like the Grateful Dead. Before them, Jerry Garcia was in a jug band.
Oh,
A lot of them are coming from that folk, jug bandy
okay.
kind of music scene into rock and roll. And so, yeah, it wasn't uncommon at all. And a lot of the folkies, once Dylan took up an electric guitar, well, then everybody else followed, And So yeah, there was a crossover, big crossover, and folk rock, you know, that kind of in between bridge, and so yeah, all that was happening.
What was Rocky Erickson like as a performer?
It's crazy. And he's like, yeah, you know, screaming and stuff. So it was interesting. It'd catch your eye, but that's what made him famous, you know. That and I mean, you know, their lyrics were all laced in LSD, you know. Don't fall down. You know, so many songs that were kind of, you know.
Were you saying
alluding to-
the jug band guy was like
Tommy Hall.
Tommy Hall? That's right. He had some connection to Trax because Trax
Yeah.
had books that he
Yeah.
was interested in. Like
Yeah,
Trax was your sculpture teacher
right.
that you were friends with, and he had like Tibetan Book of the Dead
Well, he
and
had,
stuff.
he had a whole wall of books of just, I mean, there were books of art, architecture, and a lot of kind of esoteric, you know, books on Buddhist stuff and Theosophists and mystic and, you know, black magic and
How did he get all that stuff?
I don't know.
Because that's like a treasure trove, you
Yeah.
know, to have all that stuff. This is like pre-internet. It's not like you can just go online and find this. You
Well,
had to
he
find
was-
someone that had books
Yeah, right.
with this stuff.
Well, I mean, he brought him with him, I'm sure, from California because he was trained in
Oh, he was from
California.
California.
Yeah, it's L.A.
Okay.
And he worked with Frank Lloyd Wright, or he worked with a direct draftsman or disciple of Frank Lloyd Wright. And he met Frank Lloyd Wright and hung out at, what was it, something west?
Taliesin?
Taliesin, yeah, Taliesin West. And so, you know, he's in that group, which there's lots of Eastern thought and metaphysical stuff going on. Talk about it anyway. And so, yeah, and, you know, LA, I'm sure there's bookstores full of that stuff. And so he just collected. you know,
Yeah.
And brought him with him to Texas.
Do you think the Red Crayola guys were reading that kind of stuff too? Because their lyrics seem kind of like,
Well, Tommy Hall was.
Influenced in that.
He was writing their lyrics.
well, he was writing the 13-4 elevator lyrics
Oh, for who?
for Red Crayola.
Oh, for Red Crayola. They may have been. I don't know. I don't know.
You never
how-
like talked philosophy with them, or
Well, you know, at that point, I didn't have much philosophy to talk to anybody about.
how old were you? Like 20?
Yeah, or 19 or 20 or something like that.
Yeah.
18 or 19.
That's when you should
No, I
know
was
all
even,
about the
I was
world.
even earlier. Yeah. No, because I knew them in Houston. Once I left Houston, I left all that behind. It was all, they went on their way, I went on my way.
Y'all didn't keep in touch. Did you ever play any like live shows with them? Did they ever like bring the familiar ugly up on
No,
stage?
you know, I wish I had, and I didn't know
Uh-huh.
that they had that going on, or I would have.
Yeah.
I just didn't know.
Yeah.
You know.
Would they do that though? Like, would they bring
They would.
people on stage?
Yeah, well, and they invite the audience onto the stage.
Oh, would they?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
That's
their
cool.
whole thing was they wanted the mesh. They wanted, you know, the audience and the band to merge.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a John Cage thing, and you know,
Sure.
experimental guys were trying to kind of get people to not just stand up and clap, but get into it. You know, have
Break
their
down that
own,
fourth wall.
Yeah, have their own subjective experience.
Did you ever participate in their shows like as an audience member? Like, did you ever see them play when they were doing that kind of stuff?
No, I don't think I ever did. I don't think I was. No, I just, you know, probably because I was going to school here, going to school there, working over here, and then what happened? I guess maybe before that I was working. It's funny. It would be interesting. I wish I could remember the time I was working at Shakey's, because Shakey's was good for me in that it gave me some pocket money, and I'd be working late, and I met a student from Rice who had a car. Jerry Mouton was his name. And Jerry Mouton, I think he was an architecture student, but he and I clicked. And when we got off work at Shakey's, we'd get in his car and go to places like La Maison and see live music.
Nice.
And we wouldn't even get there till midnight.
Okay.
But, and usually it was just, by that time it was like crazy,
Yeah.
But that's what we do.
Yeah.
Every weekend. And so we saw bands and, went to places that maybe probably most other people didn't go. So.
Were you aware of this record coming out, The Parable of Arable Land? Like.
Yes, in fact, that was another thing. The guy that made the cover, this painting.
Yeah, who was that? They mentioned his name.
Yeah, they
some
do mention.
artist.
Yeah, no, they mentioned his name. No, Frank Davis. Frank Davis is another interesting person. What was his name? George Banks. George Banks. I didn't know him well, but George and another guy I knew from high school and junior high school owned or ran the La Maison.
Okay.
And this other guy that I knew from high school, who lived over by us in Meyerland, Lily White subdivision Meyerland, was like this wild card. His dad was a doctor. His mother had died or something, so he was kind of brought up by his father. And I think he was an only child. His name was Davis Bowers. And Davis had this Mustang motorcycle with flames on the side.
Nice.
And he was like this wild man. He had long hair and blow in the wind. Bang! You hear him coming, zoom up and down the street. And he's always in trouble. And anyway, everybody thought, oh, Davis, he's just a no good bum, Well, he and George Banks opened up this thing called La Maison. And when I went there and I saw, Davis, hey, old buddies, because we hadn't seen each other for a year or two because high school, yeah, I don't know why, but anyway, for whatever reason. And, yeah, man, he's there. He's got the blonde girl on his arm. He's got the supercar. The guy's like...
He's the coolest guy in town.
He's the coolest guy in town. I'm thinking, damn, what happened to me? But anyway, getting back to George, I'm at the museum school, and there was this cute little girl with black hair and a miniskirt and little glasses there taking courses. And she, every once in a while, she'd say to me, I've got some marijuana. You want to get stoned? I said, yeah. And so she'd jump on the back of my little Honda, and we'd go over to my apartment, and we'd get ripped out of our heads. And then I'd take her back to the museum and drop her off. And but she was the girlfriend of George Banks. And so she would...
She wanted to smoke weed with you.
Sure she would have with George, he was probably busy. But anyway, so she'd kind of keep me updated on this. Yeah, there's this album coming out, and George is doing the cover for it.
Oh, interesting.
So I kind of knew that things were going on like that. So that was our communication. There was no internet. There was no cell phones. It was all word of mouth.
Yeah.
Who you knew and stuff. So yeah.
Do you know why they called it Parable of Arable Land? Like what that meant?
I have to ask Mayo. May have been George Banks came up with it. I don't know.
Were you aware of his art? Like, was he?
No.
Okay.
In fact, I don't think he was an artist. I think he's more like an illustrator, and I think he had a lot of other side gigs.
Interesting.
He wasn't like a known artist.
It's a cool painting.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah.
Perfect for that album.
Yeah.
And,
So when did this album actually come out? Like how much longer after this recording session? Was it like later that year,
I would imagine.
or were you already in Austin?
Well, see,
Or did they have like a release party in Houston?
they may have, and simultaneously, as soon as I graduated from the museum school, May or June or whenever that was, I went to Austin.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, right after that, because I'd gone up there before with my mom and talked to the people that be up there, and because I was going to museum school and it was questionable accreditation, they said, well, if you'll come up here this summer and take a full course of summer courses and do well, then we'll accept you and accept all your previous credits.
Wow.
So my butt was on the line, because if I didn't get accredited, then I was up for the draft, or I had to go to like some community college.
Oh, wow.
I wanted to go to UT, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to go to New York or somebody like
Yeah.
that, but I couldn't. So UT was the next best thing. And so right after I got out of high school, college, that year and a half that I spent in Houston, I was off. I was out
Yeah.
up in Austin.
So
I
you
didn't
weren't
know.
aware of this album being released?
I think I was aware of it, and in fact, I might have even had it, but I don't know. I don't know.
You don't remember like listening to it for the first time, or?
Yeah, I liked it, but there's lots of other stuff too that was coming in. So yeah, I was.
Yeah,
proud to be a
I'm
part
curious
of it.
your views on this record. Like did it make much of an impression on you at the time, like hearing it?
Well, I think, yeah, I appreciated that they had done it, had made an album, and that it was so experimental. Whether it was going to take off or not, I didn't know. But
Did it take off? Like, were you aware of other people who
I
knew
don't
it
think
that
it really
much?
did. I don't think it was
Yeah.
that. I don't think they ever got a big, giant following. They weren't like rock stars or
Yeah.
anything. Because I think as soon as they graduated, they all kind of split up too.
Interesting.
Yeah, and Mayo, I'm pretty sure he went off to Europe or something.
Mm-hmm.
And
Do y'all stay in
Rick
touch at all?
Barfamy, no, and Rick, I know he went straight to New York,
Mm-hmm.
because I remember my girlfriend at the time, Sandy, told me that she met him on the street in New York, and she said, Rick, oh wow, and he knew her, and they talked a little bit, and he said, yeah, I'm up here, I'm writing, and I've got a publisher, and blah blah blah. His dad, that connection was there.
Mm.
And so, I don't know.
Yeah, I was just curious, like how this album kind of sat in the whole like '60s milieu,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it
yeah.
seems like this album was sort of, at least from what I can gather, it seems like it kind of has garnered more of a legacy in later years, like years and years after it was
Yeah, I think
released.
you're right. I think it was underappreciated at the time.
Yeah.
But it fit right into that time slot.
Mhm.
It was perfect.
How did you see it fitting into that time slot? Like, what other bands would you feel were
Well,
like?
the Elevators,
Yeah.
for sure. And I guess too, the Mothers of Invention,
Mm-hmm.
just because they were so different than any other rock and roll thing that was going on.
Yeah.
And
This
then-
doesn't fit in with like the kind of San Francisco
No,
flowers in your
no.
hair kind of vibe.
Well, yeah, right. And neither
So, like,
did,
what-
neither did the Mothers, because
Yeah.
I think both of them were goofing on the rock and roll scene.
Mm-hmm.
I know Frank Zappa was,
Yeah.
and I'm pretty sure Mayo and Rick and Steve were also just kind of stepping out of the straight and narrow rock and roll scene and looking back on it and thinking, well, let's do something even further out. Let's
Yeah.
do something even more underground or whatever. Because
Yeah.
that was kind of the mood. Everybody was just stretch. Well, let's stretch more. Well, let's stretch. Let's really stretch. And,
that's cool.
So, that was, people were doing things like that. And I mean, you see it in the art, and so the music, of course, was, you know, running rail to rail with the art and with plays and with, you know, I mean, there's so many things that were going on at that time.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, you know, it seems like there was such a crossover with the museum school, with people gathered for this record, because it seems like even though Mayo wasn't like a visual artist at this time, seems like
He may have been. I was surprised. That was another thing that surprised me as a student at St. Thomas, that everybody was artistic. They were all doing stuff. They're doing art, they're writing poetry, they're writing underground newspapers, they're making music. I mean, these people were like, whoa, you know, they're creative types.
But he talks about this album in very visual art kind of language.
Yeah, it's, well, I think he was studying art history or something. But, yeah, I mean, it was just kind of, oh, that's what culture is. We all write and we play music and we dance and we write plays. You know? I mean, that's just what they did. You know?
How did this inform you, like in terms of your own artistic practice? Because it seems like, you know, you also are doing more like poetry and stuff now. And
Yeah, now, then I was pretty tight. I mean, I was like, I'm going to do welded steel. That's what I'm going to do. And, you know, I did some drawing and stuff. And actually, I didn't really get that inspired about drawing until I got up to UT that first summer, because I studied with a guy there that was really good. And he forced us to draw. And we drew and we drew and we drew, and I really liked it. So I was, you know, I was kind of in my own bubble. You know, it's just really kind of learning, you know, what is, you know, why welded steel. You know, well, my hero was David Smith and different people, Chaida, different people like that. And so I was just kind of plodding along that route. Mamie was more diversified, you know. She could draw, she could paint, she could make sculpture, like, you know.
who's maybe your friend?
Yeah. And she was, you know, she was just a bundle of talent. And she, you know, she was like, hey, Hayden, you want to come over and hear this Israeli album that I just bought, you know, at a, you know, 5 and 10 cent store and a big basket of albums, you know. I'm like, really? Oh, listen to the Beatles, you know. I mean, she was all over the place, you know.
You were a normie.
I was a normie. I was just look to the left and look to the right and try to bump into each other. But
Well, for a normie, it seems like you brush shoulders with a lot of weirdos.
I sought them out. You know, I really did, and I, you know, appreciated their weirdness. And I remember taking my cousin over to one friend's, this Joe Pritchett's house. He's there, sitting on the floor painting the floor of his living room with these wild colors and flowers and things. My cousin's like going, whoa, who are these people? But no, you know, it's just I was absorbing all that, and I loved it. You know, mainly because it was just a different way of looking at the world.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite avant-garde for my, you know, Meyerland, Lily White subdivision upbringing.
But you started doing like more pranks and stuff, like art pranks. Like what was that thing you told me about with like the fountain
Oh yeah.
at the museum. I mean, it seems
Yeah,
like you
we
guys
did.
were getting in some art hijinks.
Well, we did.
What was that?
No, we didn't. You know, it's funny because there was kind of a group of us, a loose group, that would just, because it was, everybody lived so close by, all that stuff was just right around the corner. And so you could just, at night, you could just walk around and go to Herman Park and stare at the stars, or walk back, and there was this big fountain, and, you know, there was a drive around right next to the museum, and you know, somebody got the idea that, oh, you know, they had these wafers of laundry soap that you could buy,
Yeah.
yeah, blue, and you just, you know, throw them in and suddenly
Make a wish.
they had bubbles all over the place.
Didn't they have to like close the street and stuff?
I don't think they closed the street,
No.
but it was definitely, you know, a sight to be seen. And so we just do silly stuff like that because, you know, we didn't have any money, and, you know, there wasn't a whole, I mean, you know, it's Houston, Texas, you know, there was things to do, but then there was, you know, gaps between things to do. So then you'd figure out your own things to do. And,
Who were you telling me about who organized the rock shows there? Like Rocky Romano or some guy like that?
I tried to look him up, and I couldn't find him on Facebook, and I couldn't find him on, when I just wrote out his name. If you look under Dr. Rocket, and I think, you know, because he was Rock Romano when I knew him, but he stayed in Houston. Mamie had a big hard crush on him, and but later he took up the name Dr. Rocket,
Okay.
and then,
He was like a show promoter?
well, he had a band that I don't think amounted to much. And have you ever heard of the Sisters of Mercy?
Yes.
I think he had something to do with them.
Okay.
Were they a Texas group?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. Maybe it was a different Dr. Rocket. But anyway, he was kind of a legend in Houston because he did a lot, you know, he's always had a band. He's always doing shows here, there, and yonder, but he never got off the ground. Never, you know, he's just kind of a local star. Nothing wrong with that. But so he, you know, I'm sure if you went and sat down with him for a while, he could tell you about different things he instigated as far as music in Houston, because he really was, from a very early time, into that scene and knew people in that, you know, as it grew and changed. So yeah, I knew him fairly well, and yeah, he's a nice guy.
I mean, what were people's thoughts on like the music scene in Texas? Because I feel like, again, just hindsight, there's a lot of focus, not necessarily from people in America, but, you know, I meet people out in England,
Yeah, right.
France,
I know.
who collect these records, these Texas psych records,
Yeah,
you know,
right,
and it's like
yeah.
this whole like fetishization, you know,
Yeah,
of like
right.
this cowboy psych. But, you know, were you aware of some sort of new Texas sound happening that felt different than the rest of
Yeah.
the music? Was there a pride about it? Were people that aware of there was something special going on, or is it kind of more of like a thing that you look back through the lens of history? And
No, I
at the
think
time
there
you weren't
was
so
no. I
aware.
think there's definitely in Austin too, at Vulcan Gas Company. That was a whole other scene. There was, you know, a pride, much pride in the, you know, the rock and roll scene, Houston, Austin, Dallas, I guess San Antonio. I don't know what was going on in San Antonio, but obviously in Corpus.
Yeah.
But yeah, bands were kind of going back and forth. By the time I got to Austin, the Vulcan Gas Company was going strong, and members of my classmates at UT were going there on weekends and doing slideshows for the bands.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they invited any art students to come and
Oh wow.
do light shows.
For what kind of band? Like 13-foot elevators?
Yeah,
Shiva's headband?
yeah. What's his name? Johnny, whatever his name was, the blues guy. We thought of his name a couple of days ago, and I can't remember it again. He and his brother, they're both big blues players.
Not the Allman Brothers.
No.
ZZ Top?
No, they were, I don't know, ZZ Top, their lead guitarist was Houston-based.
Yeah.
They were probably around just after I left, or maybe they were there before under a different name. They could have been. But I was not aware of them.
I mean, what do you think it was about Texas that might have made this scene special?
I think it was rebellion against the status quo, because there was so much kind of country western. It's just a general rebellion against anything that was Texas.
Do you think it was a reaction against Texas?
Yeah.
Interesting. Do you think most of the people that were making these bands and this music were like, I need to get the hell out of here?
Yeah, I mean, the Elevators tried a couple of times.
Do you want some tea?
No.
Or water?
No, I'm okay. I mean, it's kind of a love-hate relationship, because Vulcan Gas Company put on shows. Lots of people came. Very famous at the time. But the guy that was doing all the illustration for them, Jim Franklin, who I got to know, his poster child was an armadillo. How Texas can you get an
totally.
armadillo? And he just funked out on armadillos. He had armadillo dreams and armadillo spaceships and armadillo underground, whatever. I mean, he did whole zines on just Dillo tunes, what it's called.
Bob Dillo.
Yeah, Bob Dillo. And probably had that in there too, I'm sure. And the guy was so prolific and so good. So there was that, that Texas twang. But maybe it was pride in Texas, and we'll show them. Oh, you want underground? We'll go underground.
Right.
We'll go way underground. I mean, it might have been that too.
Yeah, I mean, I was curious too because I feel like the inclusion of the motorcycle in this picture, in this whole familiar ugly freak out session, it feels very Texan in a way. Like just the idea of like we're bringing in hot rods and motorcycles and we're just like banging on a bunch of metal and like tire rims and stuff like that. All feels kind of Texas in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like the worship of automobiles and motorcycles, and it's kind of macho.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's also got like an abrasiveness that is interesting because I feel like when I was making, when we were doing DIY touring, like back in 2009, 2010, there were a few Houston bands that I really loved, like Indian Jewelry and stuff, and I feel like they're kind of in this, familiar, ugly legacy in a way, because it's very harsh noise and like.
Were they from Houston?
They're from Houston.
No kidding.
Yeah, and also like very art informed, like Tex Kirshen writes poetry, worked at the Art Car Museum, and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like they're very in this Texas psychedelic,
Yeah.
poet tradition. But also, I feel like there was this abrasiveness because they hated Houston so much. You know, so there was just like this element of just like, you know, fuck everyone, you know.
Well, there is that about Houston. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, you've got that underground.
Because this isn't Austin, you know.
No,
Austin's a little more like,
Yeah.
cool, but
Right.
Houston's just like,
Well, but you know, Austin's got its thing too, because you know, it's state capital, legislator, lawmakers,
right,
super conservative.
huh,
You know, there's that element.
sure,
So there's that to get the hates towards. And then in Houston, it's all the bourgeois, oil field, billionaires, and you know,
Right.
all that stuff.
but at the same time, it seems like these are the billionaires that are funding this kind of cultural Bohemian scene
I know.
and bringing in all these artists to like make it more hip and
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah, no, it's true. We were educated by the best, you know, and
But also kind of simultaneously like railing against that culture.
yeah. Well, you know, and I can't, for some reason I can't remember her name. Dominique Dimonil.
It's because her daughter had a crush on you.
Well, I don't know. She invited me to her birthday party. She invited her whole class to her birthday party. She could have invited half of Houston to her birthday party. But, you know, maybe there was that element in Dominique, you know, that, you know, well, you guys are out there in the oil fields, but I'm collecting these fine artists, you know.
Right.
And I'm going to plant culture in the middle of your world,
Yeah.
whether you like it or not. And I'm going to educate your kids to where they appreciate it, even though you don't.
Interesting.
I mean, that could be
Huh.
something too. And her daughter, Philippe, married some guy who's like a semi-Buddhist, and they've gone on, well, the Dia Foundation, you know, that's her daughter.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Interesting.
And so, you know, there's that whole thing that's, you know, continued on. I mean, you know, here she was, a little princess, and she learned all about art and stuff, and came far out and married this weird guy, and they're doing all these far out art projects.
Huh.
And funding.
Yeah,
Lots
yeah.
of art projects, Martha,
Interesting.
all that stuff.
Huh.
So, yeah, it's interesting, you know, how things sort of meld in funny ways, you know.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, just how this album has kind of gotten this whole resurgence. Really, I mean, it seems like a lot of it comes from the fact that Spaceman 3 picked this record up, and Sonic Boom kind of like remastered it and, you know, re-released it. You know, and Spaceman 3 is a pretty popular British band, so that probably got some British people
Yeah.
looking into that stuff. And I can see how like Spaceman 3 would have been influenced by this band, because there's like that kind of spacey element and the noise element, and like just like the kind of freeform jams and stuff. But yeah, I mean, why do you think people would be interested in this record now?
Well, I think anybody that's looking to break new ground is going to look over their shoulder to see, did everybody else that was breaking new ground before me, did they get, well, it's like what it says right here in the very beginning, that you can tell a pioneer by the arrows in his back.
Huh.
Think about that. That, you know, anybody who's trying to break new ground, they're kind of looking to see, well, there's other people who've broken new ground, you know. They got laughed at or kicked or stones thrown at them or sued or whatever, but the ones that really did it kept on doing it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, Mayo's still making art and
yeah.
music and stuff. I mean, I
Right.
saw his stuff, the Whitney Biennial, some years back. And
Yeah. So, you know, it's kind of kindred spirits, you know, over the decades, over time. You know, Vincent van Gogh didn't sell one painting that he ever did, you know, in his lifetime.
Right.
You know, I mean, you know, you look at any of these people that are groundbreakers. Sometimes they very popular, and other times maybe not, you know. But it didn't stop them because they weren't doing it for that. They were doing it for they were getting some taste out of whatever they were doing. And so whether the public got it or not wasn't the most important thing.
Do you feel like Red Crayola were doing it for those reasons, like
I think so.
for pure reasons?
Probably a little of both. They're probably at the public, you know.
Sticking their nose out.
Yeah, but but I think somebody like Mayo, he's got he's on a mission. You know?
Yeah. Do you want to do a little a spoon demonstration before we end the interview?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I've learned so much over the last 50 years. I'm really a spoon guy now.
Where'd you find these spoons?
At a wonderful reclaim shop in Gainesville, Florida.
Still got it. Cool. Thanks, Dad.
You've been listening to
Rage Peace.
interview series. This is the first installment.
Thank you for listening.